Okay, there we go. That should work. Okay, so hello everyone. It's always great to see you as well, Philippe. So for today, what we will be discussing will be. I'm glad to. I really like Doodlebird's emojis. I've always thought they were. Also Cosmopolitics emojis. I can't. Uh, uh, you know, but I think because of the fact that I know that Doodlebird has also draws, right? As also like I like watching Doodlebird's art stream so much. So for today, for tonight, I suppose, or for today, I guess for some of you, right? We're gonna be going over the history of a little country known as Lebanon, right? As well as some other countries as well. That are definitely want to be seen as independent countries. Definitely have fought their fair fight to try to be independent, and should be independent. I believe, but I don't know. But yeah, we're gonna be talking about Dagestan and Chechnya, but we're gonna talk about it in the 19th century aspect, not the first and second Chechen War aspect. So I'm sorry if you're here to listen to the song "Don't Tell Mom I'm in Chechnya" or whatever it is. I forget what the song is called, but it's something along those lines, right? It's like don't tell mom I'm in Chechnya, or I'm going to Chechnya or something. I don't know. Anyway, songs aside, um, I'm glad to be streaming. I know it's been a little bit. I'm trying to get back to a regular schedule now that, with treatments and everything that I have to get done. So that's why I decided to kind of keep it, you know, easy, uh, right? To focus on things that, are, uh, stuff that I think people would like to discuss, generally speaking. Um, Now, the reason why I did want to speak about Lebanon is because, one, Lebanon's been in the news a lot lately, but also I did want to speak about it precisely because of the fact that it essentially is kind of forgotten, in the sense of it was France's version of the state of Israel in a weird way. Like, I know that's a weird comparison, but it was supposed to be a Christian majority state carved out in the Middle East. And so, yeah, there's been a lot of issues that have arisen because of that. But
Lebanon is on the brink of disaster, with its economy failing, its political scene.
Okay, okay. I have to say something just really, really quickly. Take what Hikmah history says with a grain of salt or two, because he also will has a video that kind of blames the Palestinians for the unrest in Lebanon, and I kind of don't think that refugees are to be blamed for, I think instead it would be the phalangists that would be to blame. But I don't know. I just tend to see the fascists as holding the blame. But
Marred by intrigue and corruption, all the while foreign powers meddle in its internal affairs. This is a far cry from its golden years in the 1950s and 60s, when the capital Beirut was referred to as the Paris of the East.
okay, okay. We're already starting off to a start. Um, why was it called the Paris of the East? Well, because it had just been decolonized, quote unquote, right, by the French in '46. But people still speak French in Lebanon. I mean, they have, in fact, the last time that I even had thought of returning to the Middle East, after having gone to Syria and to Jordan, um, was to go for a book festival that we're going to have in Beirut. But you know, but it was going to be a French book festival, and I was kind of like, I don't know, like, But yes, so one of the things to keep in mind is Beirut is a very divided city. West Beirut is more inhabited by a Muslim majority, right? And if you go southwest of, like, towards the airport, there you will encounter Sabra, uh, or Shatila, right? Um, which is, of course, the site of the horrific massacre that was committed by the phalangists with the IDF's help, right? So there's that. Um, and East Beirut tends to be more of a Christian majority, particularly Maronite Christian. Um, and so the French were given the status of protectors, or given a protectorate over the Maronite Christians of Mount Lebanon, as it was then called, because this area has never been like independent as such, right? Like there's never been a Lebanon, so to speak. Um, but there has been such a thing as like a Lebanon province, so to speak, part of Syria, right? So this was carved out of Syria, right? This is why kind of like people often will say like, why is Damascus like the capital when it's right next to the border? Well, because there didn't used to be a border there, right? Like before, Damascus was, defended by the anti-Lebanon mountains, but now, which is what they're called, the anti-Lebanon mountains, I know, but now, of course, they only parts of them are still on the Syrian side of the border. So because of this, there has always been like the intrigue that I hope Hikmah will go into. Will go talk about how Bashir's father, whose name for some reason is escaping me right now, was very, very fixated on trying to get Lebanon. Oh, thank you so much for subscribing, Dreezy. I appreciate that. Was always trying to meddle in Lebanon's affairs to try to get it to become part of. Could I recommend Mexican food to someone who has never had Mexican food in their life? Um, are there any restrictions, or things I should keep in mind, like, oh, they can't eat this or they can't eat that, right? Because that also limits things. But if it's like open game, if it's open season, so to speak, then I will definitely give you something.
In order to understand its present chaos and instability, we have to delve into the country's.
They want it very hot and spicy. Okay, so, well, then that depends, because it depends, because so much of it is dependent upon how the person makes it. But typically, you can get birria really spicy, and you can get birria tacos, which then you put like there is a taco shop by me here in LA that it's birria salsa, that it has like as its own separate salsa, is spicy, that to the point where it's just literally chile and water. Like it's just those two ingredients, so it's just the heat. So I would recommend probably birria tacos. That's what I would probably recommend. Birria, and if not, because birria like the spice level can be like, magma extracted from, the mantle of the earth, right? Yeah, of course.
Demographics and how that affects its political makeup. Many of these issues are rooted in the Mount Lebanon Mutasarrifiyat era, lasting from 1861 to 1918, and the subsequent French Mandate until the 1940s. These two periods combined to bring about the emergence of a modern Lebanese nation-state. Lebanon experienced great changes in this time, both good and bad, with hundreds of thousands moving abroad, not to mention a famine that wiped out.
Well, yeah, it was bad, but we have to also remember too that that a lot of the stuff that he's mentioning here, he's not putting it in quite the right context. Like, yes, during the Ottoman period, there were a lot of people who left. In fact, a lot of people ended up in Mexico, right? Like that's why Carlos Slim, who was the wealthiest man in the world now, and that's nothing I'm proud of, that's for sure. Is still the wealthiest man in Mexico. He's a Lebanese Mexican, right? The Lebanese community in Mexico is, tended to be merchants, or in some kind of, trading, because one, they had the connections, right, to the Levant and et cetera, et cetera. Now, and in fact, that's where we get tacos árabes, which means Arab tacos, and from that we have tacos al pastor, or you know, well, usually people know them by tacos al pastor, but you know, but they are technically have another name. But it depends how you make them. Yeah, yeah, because again, because like if you go to Puebla, which is the next biggest city over the border from, well, over the border, it's like the historically speaking, Puebla and Mexico City have always been in a kind of rivalry, right? Because they're two big cities, just on on one different sides of like of a mountain range, right? Like they're on opposite sides of the mountain range, where Mexico is in the Mexico City Valley and Puebla is like outside of it, right? And so Puebla oftentimes would get a lot of communities coming up from Veracruz, which is the main east port, and there you have a lot of Lebanese Mexicans that they began to take what like if you look at al pastor, it looks like doner kebab, like if you're used to seeing that like on a spit, right? And you cut it with a sharp knife. Even the knives are like curved, right? Kind of how they are in the in Southwest Asia, etc., right? The difference is that in Mexico people use pork, right? So that's the difference, is that it's used with pork, and it's covered in spice, and so the traditional ones tend to be brown, as in like the spices don't add any color to the meat as such, right? And then there are like people in Tijuana where it comes out bright red. It's like bright red. So yeah, yeah. I mean, they're really good. I love tacos al pastor, but
A chunk of the population. At the same time, Beirut emerged as an economic hub in the backdrop of a cultural renaissance taking place.
oh yeah, what I was gonna say is like up to 1918. Well, what happened, like from 1914 to 1918? Like just that alone, just the First World War, right? Which had, of course, not only, I mean, again, primarily we have the Armenian genocide, but we also have other actions that were taken against other peoples, right? Circassians, Lebanese Christians, etc., etc. But that's a whole different story. But one other thing to take into account is the fact that there had also been an uprising that was successful for one community, but when the next, in this case the Christian community, did it against their landlords, it didn't work out, and it caused a lot of them to be unalived. Like it wasn't because they weren't in the right. Yeah, they were suffering under a horrible system of landlordship, right? They were tenant farmers, and they wanted to, have the land be expropriated and give it to them since they worked it. But again, like he doesn't mention these things. I hope he will at some point, but because we're only a minute in, but Oh, we haven't even made it to the intro music. Yeah, yeah. See the curved swords are actually easier. They're actually easier to use because you don't put so much stress on your arm when utilizing them, as opposed to the ones that are flat. That was something I was reading about just the other day. But those type of swords, like you kind of see people use them in Mexico for cutting the meat off the spit that they use.
And came under Ottoman control with the conquest of Sultan Selim in 1516. For the next 400 years, it was subservient to the will of Constantinople. The land of Syria, or Al-Sham as it's known in Arabic, was split into various provinces. Modern-day Lebanon was mainly split between the Tripoli and Sidon Eyalats. Ottoman power was mainly felt.
And by the way, Tripoli is a very common name that's given by the Greeks to any place that has three places, right? Like, same thing, or the Romans or whatever it might be, right? Because like Naples and Nablus in Palestine, right? Naples in Italy and Nablus in Palestine mean the same thing, right? Neapolis, it used to be Neapolis, but in Arabic there is no P sound, right? There's no plosive. There is no unvoiced plosive, so instead it becomes a B sound. Same reason why all of the, so to speak, the P's all became F's. So you have Sharif, but you don't have Sharif, for example. But that would be an example. So because of that, you say Nablus, but it's from Neapolis, right? So
In the major cities, Damascus, Aleppo, and Tripoli. In the hinterlands, it was tribal chieftains that maintained order. As long as these chiefs provided their Ottoman...
Okay, I don't mean to be pausing so much, but I do dislike, and I've said this many times before on this stream, when they always want to use tribal as like a catch-all for every subdivision between a country's population and like a family. Like there has to be more divisions between a nation's population, right? Like its demonym, and then like a family, right? And its composition. But for some reason they just always go for the one all, I guess.
With regular taxes, the Sultan in Constantinople seemed content with this tax farming arrangement. In fact, Mount Lebanon was the archetype for this model of governance. The rugged region was ruled via local leaders, firstly the Ma'an family, which was of the Druze ethno-religious group, and then the Shahab dynasty, which eventually converted from Sunni Islam to Maronite Catholicism. Even in this small region, Muslims, Druze, and Christians lived together. The Levant has been renowned throughout history for its great deal of diversity. Different creeds, languages, and ethnicities converge to produce a real melting pot. This convergence can create breathtaking displays of culture, but it can also remind us of how brutal humanity could be. In 1860, a civil conflict broke out between the Druze and the Maronites, which soon spilled over to Damascus and other Levantine areas. Up to 25,000 people were killed, most being Christians.
This is what I was speaking about.
History has shown since when sectarian conflicts erupt, its multiculturalism almost becomes a detriment because the nature of the fighting becomes so
Hold up. Okay, this is one of those weird things where, again, I understand what he's trying to get at, but now he's literally found a way. Like, let's just analyze that last bit of this sentence, right? I wish they credited the artist. Yeah, I do too. That's which maybe they did in the down here, but I'm not sure. The nature of the fighting becomes so personal and passionate. Like, I have an issue when people say intersectarian violence, like, oh, it's unavoidable or it's unintractable because it's personal and passionate, right? Like, you know what I mean? Like, it's kind of like saying, like, oh, these people aren't, right? Like, it's saying that there's no rationality, right? It's saying that, right? Like, it's painting one of the groups, right, as being irrational, right? As being unthinking, right? It's all personal feuds, right? It's that is the problem with like saying it like that, because yes, there was a lot of, I mean, it's multiculturalism, which again, that also would be anachronistic to call it that in one sense, because like multiculturalism is something that was theorized in the late 20th century, but the idea of a multi-ethnic society, I mean, that is the most common form of society on the planet. It just is like uh, but to then say that everything becomes personal and passionate, and I don't know, it just sounds like it just reminds me of the language of like blood feuds, you know what I mean? And then it sounds just like the language that you have with Palestinians and Israelis, right, where they try to say like, oh, it goes back since time immemorial. Like, no, it doesn't go back since time immemorial, right? Like, there was something which aggravated this particular instance of violence that certain people use religious justification doesn't mean that therefore we can take it on as a, as if it were a justification. But
1860 happened because the Shahab conversion to Christianity in Mount Lebanon had destabilized local power dynamics. The Druze, specifically its feudal chieftains, had seen their power dwindle at the hands of the Maronites, who were being preferred in the Shahab administration. Even when the Ottomans tried to subdivide Mount Lebanon into Druze and Maronite segments in 1842, it failed to stem the rise of tensions.
it's interesting because I was reading En Histoire du Liban, which is obviously in French, but it's a wonderful book by Shearer, I believe is his surname. And when he's describing this era, like, yes, it was a division. It was like one. This shatters this myth that like people couldn't convert to Christianity or to any other religion if they had already converted to Islam, right? In the Middle East, like that just historically is not the case. People like are always changing religions, right? Like all over the world, all the time, right? It's just like, just because we're not seeing like mass, changes all the time doesn't mean that like everything is stagnant, right? People are alive, particularly people that live in, areas where where it's like a sort of borderland or a hinterland type of space anyway, because there's lots of intermarriage, et cetera, et cetera, et cetera, right? But on the other, it's like he's focusing only on the religious aspect, erases the fact that there were other reasons behind why one side felt that they were being, because they're both minorities, right? Like in an Islamic empire, right, where Islam is the state religion, right? It technically was a khalifa, right? It technically was a caliphate, right? The Ottoman Sultan was a caliph, and so to speak. Having a minority Christian and a Druze population, which Druze is very related to Shia Islam. Some people count it in as Shia Islam. I hesitate to do that because they see themselves as distinct. So, obviously, I go with how the people themselves view themselves, right? And so it's a very strange thing to say that one minority over another, right? Like, because then that's not addressing why was it that the Ottomans decided to create these different vilayets or whatever it might be, right? Now, from what I've read, it's that, again, there was a preceding event, which was you had Shia Muslims rise up against Sunni majority areas against their landlords, and it was a successful uprising. And when Christians tried to do it, it was an unsuccessful uprising, and it happened to be against the parts. It happened in the parts of Lebanon, modern day Lebanon, that are now and were then Shia majority. And so this historical event in the 19th century is not was not addressed, right? Yeah, exactly. Hello, cat pig. Um, so that I feel kind of needs to be addressed as well, because, I mean, 1842. I don't know.
1860 has a lot of parallels.
And also another thing is that when will people learn that partition really does nothing? Like, it really, all it does is just kicks the can down the road. Like for example, like when it comes to Israel and Palestine, right? Like people keep saying, oh, well, the Israelis accepted the or the Zionists accepted the partition plan. They did, but they rejected it in principle. They did in fact, right, de facto, accept it, right? But or de jure, right, technically speaking, accept it, right? They put their name on the dotted line, so to speak, but they did it so that way they could say, oh, well, they said no, right? Like this is known, like this is correspondence we have, that they wanted to say no, that they didn't actually accept the partition plan because they didn't want to get 56%. They wanted 100% of historical Palestine. So partitions don't work, like it didn't work. It still doesn't work now, so it's, I don't know, but
with the Lebanese civil war of the latter 20th century. Fundamentally,
let me see your cat pig. Yeah, I'm trying to work and you go online with a title like this. Oh, well, let's see. Yeah, partition is a strange solution. Yeah. I'm even putting aside the long-term bad idea for the sake of argument. How is it going to work in practice? Well, I mean, that's precisely the point. Like, oh, well, if we just push, all of the now dispossessed Maronite Christians into this area, right, and put all the dispossessed, Druze into this area, right? Like, all that does is just, breed more discontent, right? It doesn't address the actual conditions, right? It just speaks to the fact that the material conditions were not addressed from the initial, from the first point, right? That they needed a large land reform to, give people, right, the land that they worked on, and instead you still had, large landowners, which later would come back to play a big, huge part in Palestine, right? Are all Palestinians in Israel expelled to the New Palestine? Are all the Israelis in the New Palestine expelled into Israel? Well, the way how it worked, well, see, the way how it, when it was partitioned up, all that was required was that there be a majority. So 51% majority of Jews were in what was going to be the partition state of Israel, and that that wasn't going to last very long, but that is why from the beginning, and I mean from the beginning as in from, this was approved in November, right? UN Resolution 181 was approved by, and again, this is another thing too. The Palestinians said, we don't want the UN to decide whether or not to partition Palestine, right? Because, and I agree, right? What right have they to partition someone else's land in the first place, right? In my view, they don't. Like, any partition would have been illegal, in my view, right? But in my estimation anyway. But regardless, 181 was done in November. Yeah, a bunch of countries not from the region decided Palestine should be partitioned, right? Including when at this time in 1947, most of the countries in the world still have not come into existence yet because they are all because they are all still colonized, right? Yeah, yeah, because all the countries in the region voted no, right? Yeah, yeah, or some of them abstained, but a lot of them were still colonized, like there were still British protectorates or colonies, etc. So that, you know, so yeah, but in this case, yeah, because like I think the I know that the United Kingdom abstained, pardon me, abstained. Yeah, the still colonized. I mean, like all of Africa essentially was still colonized at the time, with the exception of Egypt. That was like the main exception would have been Egypt, although it was, you know, independent. You know what I mean? Um, and India, I mean, India had just become, and in fact, India is another example of partition, leading to horrific consequences because when they drew the 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 line, I forget what they call it now, or rather, I forget what it was called then. The line that now divides Pakistan and India, right? They had their independence celebration first, and then they revealed what the partition plan was going to happen, was going to be. Like, so so you see why this is a bit of an issue, and why like maybe the Palestinians would be like, yeah, the British are kind of sus. I don't know. They seem to do things in a really weird way. Yeah, and of course, Bangladesh. Oh yeah, and Cyprus. Yeah, how can we forget Cyprus? Of course. Um, so yeah, that's why I think to me it's kind of like, I don't know, a weird thing to sort of think what it would have been a solution. But yeah, for Palestine, they still would have had a 49 or 48% minority Palestinian population, right? But that is why the next month, and I'm not kidding, the next month in December, this is why when people say that the war, or like that, or that Israel got, you know, that like the other countries around it attacked Israel first, that's not true. It was Israel began the transfer, right, of the Palestinians and attacking civilians. I mean, these are people that are just living in their homes. This is Plan Dalet. Plan Dalet is installed in February, but they begin in December, where they begin to try to get Palestinians in what was partitioned for the Jewish state, you know, quote unquote, right, the state of Israel, to leave, right? And this is why you get the mass movement of Palestinians, right? Thousands and thousands. I believe Ilan Pape says it's like 90,000 people leave at this time. So I mean, that's quite a lot of people, right? And where do they go? They go obviously to the nearest capital cities of the neighboring nations, right? They go to Amman in Jordan, right? They go to Damascus in Syria, to Beirut in Lebanon, to Cairo in Egypt, and that is what later causes those countries to then respond to, like, why are all these Palestinians suddenly coming over, telling us, telling us that, oh hey, there are these people and and they kicked us out of our house, and they, so. Well, I'm glad to hear that, Syria is such a beautiful, beautiful country, and my heart truly goes out to everybody from anywhere. But since we're speaking about Syria, and since I've been there, it's I'm glad that they're safe, even if they're safe-ish. Safe-ish is good.
There was tensions between different Lebanese groups as a result of domestic power relations between Christians and Muslims changing, and these tensions were exacerbated by international or regional political developments. The 1860 conflict definitively ended when a French expeditionary force of 6,000 soldiers landed in Beirut. Napoleon III, leader of France, invoked his country's right to intervene in the protection of Christians within the Ottoman realm.
I've never left Europe yet. Well, I mean, I wouldn't feel compelled to do so, right? I don't think one should feel compelled to do so. But I definitely think that if you ever get the opportunity, to visit, but to go as a traveler, right? Go there, understanding, that you want to truly get to know the people that you're going to be around, that you want to communicate with them, and you want to understand, right? Not you do not like the tourist mindset. I just don't understand it, but it's this very extractive, thing, right? I've never been much for normal tourism. Yeah, I mean, me neither. Like my parents were not like that. Neither were my grandparents, and for me, it's the same thing. Like I just this is why, I tend to learn the language. I tend to try to know something of the history, etc., etc. Right. So then that way again, because I understand, like, I would want people to know something, I would want people to respect my country, my culture, right? So you know we obviously have a rising problem of racism and Islamophobia. They're Christian, but as if yeah, that's true. Yeah. But other than that, they're safe. Yeah, that's just, yeah, it's really sad that, like, because of the othering and the racialization of Islam, which goes back, to the late Middle Ages, really, right, that even now we're still suffering from the consequences of that, right? It's a very strange thing, but it is something that, oh, why was the Black Knight called the Black Knight? Oh, because people believed that his mother had Moorish ancestry. You know what I mean? Like, it's this very, okay. Also, sorry, they're mixed. Oh yeah, no, but yeah, it's like when people see Syrian, right, or they think Syrian, they think Muslim, right? Same thing when people think Mexican, right? They think Catholic, right? Indigenous, etc., 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 right? So, yeah, I totally understand that. But yeah, I don't know why this would be considered the first humanitarian intervention, because, France claimed the right to intervene in the name of Christians as the supposed quote unquote first daughter of the church. Because countries are gendered, like they are, you know it's like personas, but countries, you know what I mean? So that's, La France, right? uh so
The aftermath of what was likely the first humanitarian intervention, an international commission agreed to establish the
right.
Lebanon Mutasarrifiyat in 1861. Its leader was to be a non-Lebanese, non-Turkish Ottoman Christian administrator.
See, so, again, yeah, in English, countries are female, generally speaking, yes. But there are some countries that are gendered as male, apparently so. But usually, because in Latin, most countries are ia or ea, right? Because you have, Anglia, right? Or Britannia, right? Hello, Neuro Riot. Welcome in, welcome in. Yeah, Britannia and America, right? Yeah. Is Mexico gendered? Yeah, I've seen yeah, Germania or Germania. Um yes, I've seen pictures of where Mexico is also um feminized, right? Where she, quote unquote, right, is depicted as there was this painting that was done, I think, in the late 19th century, of, all of the Americas. Well, it's a weird painting, but in the sense of, of course, Canada and America, they're like blonde hair, and and then Mexico's there with its shock of dark hair, right? And so are these other countries that are there, but they're all women, right? And it's like something like I forget what it is, but it's something like the liberty of the Americas or something like that. Yeah, it's like a really weird painting because I'm just like, okay, like it's just they're just sitting around, just talking, I guess. But yeah, usually most countries are gendered when they are depicted in art as female. They can be depicted, yeah, Rammstein subverted that by casting an Afro-German woman as Germania in Deutschland. Yeah, yeah. And another thing too is like a lot of the figures, like Mexico, often doesn't portray itself as a woman, if that makes sense, right? Like it will often depict Mexico using stylized images of Aztec warriors or whatever, right? Like it will do that. Which is, yeah, I like, again, like I said, it's a very, because nation is gendered feminine, like the word nation, la nación, right? But yeah, anyway. It's just weird to see it now, because now it's like I kind of don't see countries in any, like, to me, I'm like, they're literally abstractions.
Key cities such as Beirut, Sidon, and Tripoli were to be excluded, despite French desires to have as expansive an area of influence as possible. British.
Also, could you imagine, like, okay, you get invaded by the French, right? And they're like, yeah. I mean, like, literally, like, borders are literally there for private property purposes only. Like, that is literally what they exist for. Like, where private property of this sort can end and where private property of that sort can begin, right? And that's pretty much all it is. But give me one quick second here. Yeah. And borders in the modern fixed and default close sense. Oh, very recent. I mean, like even the idea of like a border wall, like as we know it, like here in the U.S., it's from 1995. That's how recent it is. Like, one quick second. I'll be right back.
Ottoman concerns helped to contain French designs. These episodes of violent discord, as well as economic difficulties in the rural areas, forced many Lebanese to immigrate abroad. Their move was facilitated by developments in naval technology, with steamships making journeys far shorter in time and cheaper. Hundreds of thousands of Lebanese, mainly Christians, ditched the difficult terrain of the countryside to come to port cities like Beirut. From there, they went mainly in two directions, one being the New World, the USA and various South American countries like Brazil, and
Oh my gosh, seriously? Okay, I need to go back because I don't think I heard exactly what he said, but
French designs. These episodes of violent discord, as well as economic difficulties in the rural areas, forced many Lebanese to immigrate abroad. Their move was facilitated by developments in naval technology, with steamships making journeys far shorter in time and cheaper. Hundreds of thousands of Lebanese, mainly Christians, ditched the difficult terrain of the countryside to come to port cities like Beirut.
wait, but why is he showing this? I mean, how could they have patrolled? Well, see, that's an interesting thing. Like liberalism, when it in its initial, in its origins, believed that there shouldn't be such a thing as like a hard border, right? And also, like, before, borders wouldn't have to be policed in the way they are now, because the border points would be where people want to go, right? Like Like, for example, the most traversed um, border crossing in the world is San Isidro in Tijuana, between the Mexico and the United States. Before, people that wanted to cross the border, right, by walking across would go through there, right, which is an urban route. But because of the militarization, the all of the stuff that they've done to the border, it's made people no longer take urban routes, but instead have to go farther and farther and farther away, right? Because now they can't just go straight there as before. And so that's one of the big issues, right? It's like the policing the borders created the problem that then they say they need policing the borders to solve, quote unquote. Um, so that's one aspect. Another thing too is that, like, liberalism in its classical sense, I suppose one could say, believe that there should be, it has this idea of consent of the governed, right? Especially in the English tradition, but generally speaking, consent of the governed doesn't mean that that you give your consent as in through voting or whatever, but it also is that you can live wherever you consent to be governed, right? Like, oh, I want to give my vote, right, to the British Crown, let's say, right, or to the French Republic, or to the Dutch Republic, right? Like, that was also your way of saying that that you were willing to consent to be governed, right? You had okay. Okay. So all I was saying was that, like, the consent of the governed part of liberalism also extended to which country you wanted to live in, right? Like, you should be able to consent, right, to give your vote, like that phrase Americans love to say, like, vote with your feet, right? I mean, I know it's not just an American thing, but Americans tend to say it a lot, right? And it's like, yes, like, become ungovernable. I mean, that's true. That's truthful of Nix. That is true. Um, so in this case right here, in this case, what you would have is, um, like, if people wanted to live in Mexico for whatever reason, right? Because, oh, it had a centralized government instead of a federal government, right? Let's just say, right, that therefore they should be able to, and that's why they were against passports in the beginning, right? And now, like, the quote unquote classical liberals tend to be the people that are most, border happy among, But I don't see why he's like, why is he showing these European Orientalist paintings like this? This is not even Lebanon. Like this is like people's, like, I don't know. Like, I find it very strange to talk about, like, yeah, there was a diaspora of Lebanese people, and a lot of it happened in the 19th century. What? What, full of nicks? Oh, yeah. The paintings, yeah. Yeah, because they're Orientalists, right? Like, they're meant to. Oh, it's all desert. It's all like maybe if this is looking somewhere else, right? Like, but this is not Lebanon. Lebanon is not like desert. There aren't. It isn't. It's not where you have large caravans of camels and all of that stuff, right? Um, so, uh, it's actually quite a fertile part of of the. I mean, it's literally in the Fertile Crescent. You know what I mean? So
From there, They went mainly in two directions, one being the New World, the USA and various South American countries like Brazil, and the other to nearby Middle Eastern countries. From the latter group, Egypt became...
See, that it's weird that then he uses an old map of the Americas because the viceroyalty of New Spain ended in 1810. Right? Like if he's talking about post 1830, Mexico existed as its own country in 1830. But he shows it as if it were still part of the Spanish Empire, which, if it were, then would have had all... Sorry, I guess because now that he's crossing over, like, directly into, like, my, area of expertise, now I'm like, wait a second, that doesn't make any sense, because, like, they didn't allow X, Y, Z, like, oh, they had to check to make sure that you didn't have any admixture with XYZ and blah blah blah, and they had to do this, and like, unless you were part of their empire, the Spanish tended not to allow people to just move around in their empire. That was why, like, when there was the Iberian Union and Portugal and Spain became one united kingdom, a lot of Portuguese Jewish people, right, used the fact that they had Spanish ancestors, technically speaking, right, as a way to kind of cover up the fact that they were Jewish, right? They could say, oh, well, we have Spanish ancestors, right? Because it's not as though they would have been written up before they left as if they were Jewish, right? So then they were able to claim Spanishness, right, only, and were then able to move to the Americas, because you had to have your blood purity checked. So yeah, so again, like, this is why, like, I always have maps around me, because I'm always like, if you show the viceroyalty of New Spain, they wouldn't have allowed just, like, people coming from, like, the Ottoman Empire, which, by the way, Spain was very, very, very much against. So, back in the day. So,
the preferred destination. The Ottoman province had been subdued by the British in 1882 and was a hotspot of intellectual...
Okay, so then he's talking about 1882. Why would he show the viceroyalty of New Spain? The viceroyalty of New Spain didn't exist in any real form, like de facto after 1810 and de jure after 1821. So we're in 1882. This is like the Mexican the Mexican revolutions of independence are over. The Mexican-American War is over. And also, he also showed a map that showed the United States, like, sea to sea. But the viceroyalty of New Spain is only just Mexico itself. That was a strange. And also, like, I love these lithographs or drawings of Al-Qahira, as it's called in Arabic. But yeah, like, Cairo is such a beautiful, beautiful city. The one thing that has happened, though, is because of the way in which capital tends to concentrate into fewer and fewer hands, and because of imperialism and other such things, right, have all added up to make Cairo from one of the cities that didn't actually used to have a population density problem, so to speak, to having one, right? In that, you have so much of the population of the country wanting to live essentially in Cairo itself, when before not that Cairo wasn't a big city, but it wasn't as densely populated, right? But that's because, like, that's where all the jobs are, right? That's where all the, jobs that are... Hello, Moa Noap. Welcome in. It's good to see you.
Cultural and economic activity. There emerged in Egypt a Lebanese community that was cosmopolitan and influential. This affected Egypt, where the publishing industry was dominated by Syrian and Lebanese migrants. Al-Ahram news...
I have to say something. This is the first time in, like, almost, like, well, I don't know, like, probably in any one of these, like, YouTube history videos that talks about the Middle East, that has ever even mentioned the publishing industry anywhere outside of Europe, right? Like literally, I've never heard them like ever mention stuff like that before. Like it's kind of like, whoa, they actually mentioned, the fact that hello, hello.
Newspaper, a mainstay of Egyptian journalism for the last 150 years, was actually set up by Salim and Bishara Taqla, Lebanese migrants to
Wiki lists Greater Cairo metro region at 22 million now. Yeah, and again, like Cairo used to be known for being like a very tidy, kind of city, right? It was not known for. Now there's a lot of, again, not out of, not because of any of the working classes choices, right? But because of like where all of the capital is concentrated, where all the investment happens, right? Has been done only in like the Cairo area, which is why you have all these like suburbs and places that are being built, that are unsanitary and unsafe, right? And again, it's not like people build them to be this way, right? The people that are forced to work in these horrific conditions, it's that they have no other way, otherwise they have nowhere to live, right? That's why I hate when people want to like criminalize it insofar as like, oh, the people themselves are also, right? It's like, honestly, if people could live in, a nice suburban home, I'm sure they would, but people will survive as they will, right? So yeah, same problem in France, the UK, right? There's a lot of, and so that's the same thing with Cairo. It's just it's more concentrated because of the fact that Egypt, most of its population, like almost all of it, is along the Nile River, right? So that, causes an exacerbation of those issues for sure. In Britain, the London-based parliament micromanages where the trams go in Manchester. It's absurd. Oh yeah, there's some, or yeah, that's just.
Alexandria. In fact, much of the Arab world at the time was experiencing a renaissance, now known as the Nahda. This was a cultural movement intent on charting a new course for the Arab world within modernity. From it sprung most of the ideologies that would come to dominate 20th century Middle East: nationalism, secularism, and even Islamism. Lebanese thinkers were very well represented within the Nahda: Ibrahim al-Yaziji, Georgi al-Zaidan, Butrus al-Bustani, and Rashid Ridha, to name a few. Those that had migrated to the Americas developed their own literary movement, known as the Mahjar, with Khalil Gibran being the most famous of the Mahjari writers.
Oh my gosh. Have people ever read his book, The Prophet? When it first came out, it was like one of the most like best-selling books of the time. Like everybody wanted a copy. Just T.S. Eliot was inspired by the book, right? I mean, this is where you start. The issue is that this is when you start to get a lot of books that do this like mysticism of the East type of thing, right? Like, it's on my reading list. I mean, it's not bad. Like, it's not a bad book, but it's just like then other people, right? White people then started to take it and do like a Eat, Pray, Love, but of everywhere else but Europe. You know what I mean? And 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 that's why we have Eat, Pray, Love, and so.
The goal was to sustain the Arabness of the migrants in their new settings. With the decline of the Ottoman Empire and the introduction of nationalism from Europe being supported by a rising printing press, ideas around identity were becoming increasingly important for both the diaspora and those living.
Okay, this is another thing too, is to say that nationalism is a uniquely European thing. Like, oh, it wouldn't have arisen had it not been for like Europeans telling the Lebanese, right? Like, oh, until Europeans told the the people in the Middle East that, hey, did you ever know of this concept of the nation state? It's like, and who best actually just like literally like one scholar that just like completely undoes this whole narrative because of his analysis, his historical analysis of this, is Frederick Jameson in his book Imagined Communities, where he talks about the rise of nationalism. He doesn't focus on Europe first. He focuses on Latin America first. For a reason. It wasn't European countries that started with this whole like, hey, like I woke up today and I feel a little bit German. You know what I mean? Like I don't know. So this guy is to blame for Eat, Pray, and Love. Yeah, pretty much. Well, at least once we take we take the unfair credit for something, but well, I mean, it's just like well, I mean, the type of nationalism, right, is one thing, right, and obviously, Latin America colonized by Europe, yes, but nationalism as such, right, like let's say the mechanism of it, right, was something that arose, right, in the wake of, right, all of these countries becoming independent, one right after the other, and them having to define themselves against the peninsulares, the people from the peninsula, Spain, right, and now have to create a national history, right, that like addresses the fact that like, well, but isn't your grandfather from the like aren't you also there from there too, right? So it's this mechanism, right? And it's like it doesn't require, right, like, oh, for the Peace of Westphalia in Germany to happen, right? Like it doesn't require the Napoleonic Wars, right? It doesn't require, like that's why I kind of find it a bit weird when people like overemphasize hello Baked. Welcome in. It's so nice to see you, Cam. How are you? There's different kinds. I see no problem with ends. Right, well, yeah, I mean, there's proletarian nationalism, there's bourgeois nationalism. I'm talking about, like, the very beginnings of bourgeois nationalism, right?
In Lebanon, much of this development was fueled by an explosion in literacy rates. Schools began emerging in villages across the Mutasarrifiyat. Those that wanted to pursue a higher education had ample opportunity in major cities like Beirut, where Western Christian missionaries sought to spread their religious influence by...
Good, I'm so glad to hear that. Well, thank you so much for, I know I usually never stream this late, but, I thought I would because I felt... like streaming because I haven't done it in a little bit. So once again, once again, we have here him literally saying the European soon-to-be colonists, that are definitely whatever. It's because they're the ones that brought schools to Lebanon. But we know, and this is just even from my knowledge of the history of Palestine. Yeah, I don't like... No, I totally get that full of Nix. I totally understand that. But, like, now, it's like this weird thing where he's like, well, if it wasn't for Western missionaries, there wouldn't have been more literacy. But you just said before this that the people that went to Cairo... stimulated the printing industry. Like, it's like you can't have one without the other, right? Like if you don't have generalized literacy, then you don't have a printing industry. Then you can't go off to another country and have a print and stimulate their printing industry, right? Like I don't know, but also to say that it was Christian missionaries. Yeah, I mean, I have always been kind of whenever he made a video saying like no, yeah, I'm saying that you can have high analphabetism, right? But it's a weird thing to say, right, that like everywhere you go, right, everywhere where Lebanese people went, right, they had their own they had their own literary movement. They were, um, uh, gave, stimulated the Arab language press, right? Like that seems to me to then say that, oh well, the education was completely absent, or was, well, maybe not completely absent, but was so lacking. I feel like, well, then you have to account for why was it then that you had so many Lebanese people, right? That became so big in the printing industry, in literature, right? Like, I guess to me that's more my question, right? Not so much of A to Z, but rather, why is it that first you're praising all of this stuff, and now you're saying, but also nobody, high analphabetism, and using that to highlight or to try to say that it was Western, you know, evangelical, or not, when I say evangelical, I mean like as in openly proselytizing, right? Not evangelical as like American evangelical, right? Schools that, from any denomination, right, that came to Lebanon and opened up schools and were used for, that purpose, right? Um, I guess to me that's always the issue, because it's ignoring the fact that there is schooling, right? There was schooling under, even under the Ottoman Empire, right? So, I mean, one, there is still religious schooling, like at madrasas, right? But there were schools. I mean, Ben Gurion himself, like the first prime minister of Israel, attended a university in the Ottoman Empire at Istanbul University. So, and I know from the history of Palestine, yeah. Again, I'm not saying that there's that, but I guess it's like to then say, oh, we need to thank the missionary schools. You know what I mean? Like that's for me. I'm like, I don't want to give thanks to the missionary schools, I guess.
Establishing numerous schools that are still the leading academic institutions inside the country, with the American University of Beirut and St. Joseph University being the best examples. In the second half of the 19th century, Beirut was one of the fastest growing cities in the world. Its cultural development went hand in hand with its economic growth as the port city became...
Like one of the things I know from Palestinian history was that obviously the big population centers, right? Like, as they were growing, right? You begin to have more education in general, right? But education, it's interesting because there's this, is it I forget what it, I know I mentioned him in my last article on Substack and on Patreon, that that the person they put in charge of essentially the Ministry for Education of Palestine essentially looked down on Palestinians and said, oh, like they don't know how to educate themselves, so to speak, right? And so he wanted to give them a certain kind of education, right? One which like taught them just enough so that they could be, but also not too much education because, blah, 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 right? Whatever colonialist reason. But it came at the expense of like localized education system that already pre-existed, right? That was based in Arabic, that was based in, you know what I mean? So I guess it's just, so yeah. So they could be productive and or right, yeah.
Hub for international trade. In 1888, the city's importance was recognized by Ottoman authorities when it was promoted to a vilayat, the first level administrative division. By the turn of the 20th century, Beirut was handling up to 10% of international trade within the Ottoman Empire. Chief amongst its exports was silk, which would be transported to Europe, mainly France. In addition to its naval links with the rest of the world, Lebanon's interconnectivity was aided by a French-built railway that linked Beirut to Damascus. Whilst Beirut boomed, Mount Lebanon was characterized during the Mutasarrifiyat era by a rural exodus. In this period, it is estimated that up to a quarter of the population left the area to seek a better life elsewhere. Migration became such a big deal that by the beginning of World War I, money being sent by the diaspora to Mount Lebanon became one of its main sources of income.
I mean, like, what he's describing right there with, like, the railway and all of the stuff that France is doing, that's imperialism. Like, that's literally, Lenin could have brought that up instead of the German Empire building the Istanbul to Baghdad railway. Right? Like, literally, like that yes, and then that causes for the internal market to have to compete with the world market for staple goods like like whatever, like wheat or barley, etc., against far cheaper things that are produced by the larger, the French Empire, for example, at a much lower price. And so then people have to go and move away, right? So it's like, this is where a reading of Lenin's Imperialism, the Highest Stage of Capitalism, would help. But it makes the cities get bigger. But again, it's like, this is, and this is part of what I was saying earlier about Al-Qahira, right? About Cairo, is like the reason why it's 22 million people, as I believe you said, Cat Pig, is that because of imperialism, right? Like, because the super profits are guaranteed in places like capital cities, right? In places like the port cities, right? Because they don't want to invest too deep into the interior unless there's something lucrative there, right? So that's where, 22 metro region, right. And that's a lot. Mexico City is like about the same, so.
Most left the country, but many relocated to nearby coastal cities, thereby having a massive impact on the demographics of the country. For instance, Maronites who left Mount Lebanon for Beirut and established themselves were able to ascertain more power, something that would become crucial once the French moved in after World War I. In 1914, Europe broke out into war. The Ottomans joined the Germans to fight against the British, French, and Russians. Considering Mount Lebanon and cities like Beirut had attracted
Also, I think that that the Ottomans had the highest percentage of casualties, like in terms of their population, of any country in the war, which I've always found, it's like 14% or something like that. It's like unbelievably high. Like, I think England is like 2%, which is still high. That's a lot of people, but like 14%, that's a lot of people. Like, just, I don't even know what to say.
a lot of European attention in recent decades, the Ottoman army moved in to assert their authority over the region. Jamal Pasha, one of the three pashas that ruled the Ottoman Empire during World War I, was sent by the government to the Levant to coordinate Ottoman efforts against the British in Egypt. Conscription and Turkification policies were introduced, whilst the basic law of the Mutasarrifiyat was disregarded, making Jamal Pasha a hugely unpopular figure amongst the Lebanese and Syrians, who referred to him as As-Safa, the bloodshedder. To confound matters even further, various factors converged in 1915 to cause the Great Famine of Mount Lebanon. Hundreds of thousands died from starvation as the Allies blockaded the Eastern Mediterranean in order to weaken the Ottoman economy.
Like, yeah, like this part, the thing I was looking at, I don't think it was soldiers. I think it was of the whole population. Or you know what? I don't remember. I would have to look it up because but it was like it was in a book. It was looking at it was The Other Western Front or something like that, something titled something like that. Anyway, but I've seen that. But I've seen an infographic like that before of the First World War, where the Ottoman Empire has like the highest percentage of total casualties in the entire war, and it's like 14%. I don't know. Um, Again, if it's less or more, please don't let it be more. But like what's happening with right now, what's happening, what they're talking about is the British, which by the way, when the British, this is when the British take over Palestine, right? They do it in such a ruthless way that I really, really just don't even like. They've already like. I know his focus. We're on where it was one per. So then I wonder. So then I wonder if that's soldiers, or I wonder if that's. I wonder where then the high percentage was then. I wonder if it was like total affected people, but that's a very vague. Anyway, I'll have to look it up. I'll have to look it up because, yeah, it depends what you count. Yeah, I don't think. Yeah, the blockade related famine. Yeah, because, like, does it include civilians? Does it include the wounded? Does it include, yeah, like, also, this is when the Armenian genocide happens, right? So.
Whilst a swarm of locusts demolished what little crops remained, the famine-like conditions soon led to epidemics, as the lack of nutrition and hygiene encouraged the spread of diseases such as dysentery and typhoid. Mount Lebanon's population...
Well, gosh, I see. This is where aside. There's a really. Oh, and this was just it. Okay, I see. Of the total 300,000 casualties, 200 fatalities, in addition to civilian deaths. Oh yeah, I mean Armenians. Oh yeah, the Greeks, which again is also not very talked about, is what happened with Greeks, and the Assyrians. 300,000 Assyrians systematically. Oh. Yeah. The people, it's already difficult to have people acknowledge the Armenian genocide, let alone every other group of people that was targeted in the Ottoman Empire towards the end of its existence. 99%. Yeah, it is very impressive. I mean, same thing with Cuba, right? Like, this is what I say. Look, if Cuba, regardless of, I know Cuba has a lot of problems, trust me. And I will say those problems. But the fact that it can still guarantee housing for every single person. Yeah, Eastern Bloc levels of literacy, right? Like the fact that they can still guarantee when they have a 99% 0.9 literacy rate, able to guarantee housing. And again, it's not the best housing, but it's better than no housing, right? It's better than no housing, right? Which is in California, or California, as people like to call it, which I wish California was as communist as right-wing people claim it to be, because it's not. It's a right-wing, yeah. It's actually very right-wing, very neoliberal, and everything. Everything is means tested, and it's ridiculous. But we have the highest rate, and a lot of that is because housing is very expensive in California, very expensive. What it takes to live in California as a single person, right? Like to just get by in California is six figures. It's over $100,000, like $127,000, right? A couple, it's imagine just doubling that, right? If you're a couple, right? Like that's a lot of money, right? That's like almost £150,000 a year, right? To just get by in California, right? Or or maybe 165 euro a year just to get by in California, right? It's unbelievable. But there's that. Yeah, almost so expensive. It's better to live on this. Yeah, oh yeah, exactly, Raven. There are people who are unhoused who have a full time job. There are also people who are technically getting unemployment benefits, but have to work as if. Uh, the nation state I was saying was Cuba, right? Cuba. That Cuba has a system where it doesn't matter. And again, I'm first to say that Cuba has a lot of problems, right? A lot of problems, and I am not unwilling to call them out. Trust me. But the fact that they have a system where everybody is guaranteed a home, right? Um, uh, Under the huge U.S. embargo and everything, right? And you can even move. I mean, it's not easy, right, as you can imagine, because but like if you plan on moving to this other part of Cuba, right? Like they literally try to like, oh well, this person wants to move to Havana, so let's, you know what I mean? Like it seems it makes sense, right? You and imagine how much easier it would be if they weren't under the blockade, under the embargo. But you know, just base rent, I pay like €350 a month. Oh, I'm talking about a studio apartment costs like almost €3,000 a month. Because it's where half the heart is. Oh, well, the number of unhoused people that's also full-time workers in the USA is bad, and it shows blatantly how glaringly how much capitalism succeeds in failing, so to speak, right? It's also bills including internet. Oh, that's not even including bills. Yeah, like €3,000 is not an uncommon rent per month. In LA, that's for not even a one bedroom. That's for a studio apartment. So Canadian housing promises are also horrible. Yeah, and again, building more housing stock, as they love to say, which to me is just like every time they say housing stock, I think of like stock cattle, right? So I think of. I know this is dumb, but it's just one of those things where it's just like, oh, like when you first hear a term, right, and you kind of like don't know how to imagine it in your mind, so you imagine it in this like random way. And for me, it's thinking of like every home comes with like a cow with it. I don't know. Like it's like, oh, new housing stock. Oh, we need a house cow now. Anyway, that's just my dumb thing, but. Although homelessness rate is definitely higher here now than in 1989. Oh, I'm sure. For sure. I mean, everywhere in post Eastern Bloc Europe. I mean, by definition. I mean, like Russia. I mean, Moscow used to never have used to be the city that, if anything, would have had a huge homeless problem, right? But it did not really have that issue. And again, that's not. Again, I have been, more than critical of the Soviet Union. So, like there, many improvements. There's an old joke I cite from the time around Parenti's book Black Shirts and Red. It was floating on Russia in 1992. Says, what did capitalism do in 1 year that communism couldn't? Make communism look good. Oh yeah, that's true. That shock therapy treatment. Oh yeah. Which, by the way, is like America's done that even to other capitalists, like allies of itself, right? Like it did that to Japan when it wanted them to stop being a Fordist economy and to be a neoliberal one, right? That's what caused the huge housing bubble, or the huge land speculation bubble where the gardens around the Imperial Palace in Tokyo, and just of that one palace of the emperor, who you will remember is the only person left on the planet allowed to call himself emperor, right? Japan is the last empire, or as much as people like to think it's just like a kingdom, it's the empire of Japan. And don't look at their naval Do not look at their naval ensign. Do not look at their naval flag. It has, because it will disappoint you, and very much so. No, but yeah, it's actually it will upset you. At least it does to me. Um, I heard a similar joke. We always knew everything about the Soviet Union said about socialism was a lie. Sadly, we had to learn everything they also said about capitalism was true. Yeah, yeah. Of course, you can do capitalism better than the Soviet Union did. I mean, or pardon me, you can do socialism better than the Soviet Union. Yeah, of course. Yeah, I mean, like, again, like, I don't think as leftists we should ever be, um, we should foreclose, right, our desire to be open to critique, right? Um, Again, with other Marxists, right, and like with the people, right? Like that's one of the things where like I think Mao's idea of like the two-line struggle and from the people to the masses and the past, et cetera, et cetera, right? I think is a very important stuff. Lots of liberals and conservatives just wanted an end game out of socialism, but there just isn't. Oh, no, no, no. Yeah, it's a process no matter. Right. Like, in the same way that feudalism midwived capitalism, as the saying goes, right? So too will capital. Like, it's not. I don't like to use the term inevitable, right? Because we can have a lot of fascism along the way. The fascism was the friends we made along the way. But you know what I mean, right? Like, uh, there will be a lot of horrific stuff before, right? Because capitalists have just so much power, right? And we live in an age where that power can be used and impressed upon people literally anywhere in the world because of imperialism, right? And that is what makes it so different from feudalism, right? Where, again, like the reach of the power wasn't as yep. So yeah, socialism is a stage of revolution, right? Yeah, like the lower stage and then the higher stage, right? And I mean, and that's why like Mao specifically states, right, that like that's why you have to consistently be careful for people that are uh, gosh, why is this revisionists, right? I mean, it's in the bloody name that it was socialist. Yeah. Oh yeah. No. Of course, I'm not disagreeing. But yeah, Joe Rogan recently had some communists had to what? That's not okay. That's just disgusting and just not even true. Like Lex Friedman tries to play that game of like, oh, my time in the Soviet Union when he was like 3 months old, I guess, and he was eating baby food. Oh, the food was terrible. Yeah, I bet it was. Because everyone wants to be the little Gerber baby, right? But he tries to do that when it's like Belarus is like was and still is like one of the most industrialized place in all of Europe. Like, I don't know what you're talking about. Like, literally, like, the country that still does all of the things that people think progress is, right? Like, that's the country you came from. So, like, I don't know.
Population was cut down in half by what the Lebanese refer to as the kafno. These conditions would remain until the war ended in 1918.
Also, remember that at this time, right, you could not. There were other competing, as I've actually discussed in my articles and also in other streams. There were people trying to create because of swelling Arab nationalism, right? Trying to start a pan-Arab state, right, or some kind of kingdom, right, that were trying to unite all of the lands that we're talking about. So they were telling one group of people, oh yes, we will give you these lands and blah blah blah, whilst at the same time starving the people that lived in those lands, right? So like again, like we need to remember that this didn't just affect Lebanese people, because Lebanon as such didn't exist yet, right? Um, like it wasn't a country. Like there wasn't Lebanese nationalism before there was a Lebanon, right? Like Lebanese nationalism as such, right, is something that had to be carved out of Syria, and it particularly was centered upon the fact that the French wanted to create a Christian majority state, right? So, and also, yes, if you'd like to help my research, you can always go to Throne. I currently have a book here that's 24% funded, that's talking about nuns navigating the Spanish Empire. Well, food selection was usually limited even in very wealthy East Germany. We had far higher standard of living than the Soviets. Yeah, no, I know. I have read about that. In fact, that was one of the things that that the Soviets actually saw as like a really interesting thing, or one of the that the Soviets actually liked to host things in East Germany, because it was kind of like, oh, look at this, And in fact, I actually remember reading this was back in the day, like back when you have to do archival research, right? When you used to have to go through news clippings. But I remember seeing it, the English translation of this, right? And yes, yeah, Leipzig. The piece of the little cutout of the clipping that said that, and again, this is using, I won't use the language of the time, when it's talking about transgender people, right? Now that the Germanys are going to reunite, and it's talking about how East Germany is afraid for its transgender people because they are going to lose civil rights by joining the democratic capitalist West as one country. And I will never forget reading that newspaper clipping in the archive, because I was like, you would think, like people want you to think that capitalism would be the other way around, right? But yeah, women still haven't caught up to 1989, right? And I mean, another thing too was at the time of, weren't there still there were some of the older laws too. Although it's gotten a lot better in West Germany. Well, that's good. We kind of met in the middle. I mean, definitely Germany altogether has, gone above and beyond, but it's that. But yeah, but I'm pretty sure everyone had enough food. Well, right. I mean, everyone in the Eastern Bloc and different government, obviously the different governments had different things that because Germans eat more pork than Macedonians, right? You know what I mean? So I forget what was the weird example that someone gave. So someone was giving a presentation once, and they were trying to describe what being an average German is like. Yeah, pork is and they were like, yeah, 5 kilos of pork a week for each person, and I'm just like, okay, like that. But yeah, you have that in Germany, and then you have mutton in the Balkans, and then you have blah blah blah, right? Oh no, capitalism fueled and did some horrible trans and queerphobic stuff when states went. Oh yeah, no, I mean because a lot of the yeah, it's me agreeing with you. Yeah, because a lot of the place, when they got rid of the Soviet constitutions and laws, well, what did they revert back to, right? A lot of times things like the sodomy laws, right? They were reinstated. Like in Germany, that was the case too, right? Because West Germany still had those laws on the books, but East Germany had already done away with them, right? So Yeah. Also plano misogyny. Oh yeah, and of course, how could we forget?
By the end of summer 1918, the British forces were advancing from Egypt into Palestine, and so the Ottomans retreated from Mount Lebanon. The flag of Sharif Hussein's Arab revolt was hoisted in Lebanese cities in October 1918. But these celebrations were cut short just a few days later when the British and French landed in Beirut and dissolved the Arab government. In the aftermath of the Treaty of Versailles in 1919.
Wait, I like how he's going over the Arab revolt, like one of the most important historical events in the 20th century for for the Middle East, and he just like, and then they dissolved the Arab government. Like, bro, what is this? What is it? You can't just be like, and there was an Arab revolt that started in October, and this is what I was saying just like 10 minutes before. He just glances over it. It's beyond me. It's just like, oh my gosh, bruh, you gotta like at least like yeah, well, no, I would say that, yeah, you cannot have capitalism without patriarchy, because it's kind of like, I think that's one of the reasons why, like, why, like, and I mentioned, it's funny, as I've been having these, what are they called? These, premieres, right, of older streams, right, on YouTube. I've been noticing, like, my research, like me reading, like me talking about who I'm reading at the time, and I noticed, like, there's like a time period where I'm bringing up Thomas Kuhn a lot and his book, right, that belonging and genocide, which is talking about Germany, and because one of the things I keep talking about is like the whole oh, masculinity is under attack and blah blah blah. It's like, that is right there, like right in the, like, that is where so much of like fascist rhetoric gets that initial spark, right? Like, it is the flint to the edgy boy messiah wannabes, steel, right? It just sparks that ember. And it's just like, oh, I hate seeing it, but it's because of patriarchy, right? Because, like, that is one of those fundamental oppressive aspects of capitalism that it will always rely on to try to reassure and reassert itself, right, over and over in any form of capitalism. Right, like whether it was, the older form of capitalism, whether it was Fordist capitalism, whether it's, industrial capitalism of the 19th century, whether it's neoliberalism now, I've missed a few of your streams lately. Feels good to be here. Oh yeah. Just wanted to say, as being here warms my heart despite the heavy topics. That's why, like, I try not to always talk about, like, every, but it's like, I also like I mean, that's why I used to, like, well, that's why I do respond to people that do bad history a lot, but because sometimes it can be funny, right? But oh my gosh, and I don't know, I don't think so. I don't think that Narwhal is here. Okay, you like heavy topics and I like your stream. Well, thank you, you're right. I appreciate that. Yeah, that's why fascist or supremacist movements get their steam from the idea of protecting white women. Yeah, especially, yeah. And there's a very good article called "The Nazi Myth of Motherhood," or Mythology of Motherhood. Very good article, but it talks about how, like, that, like, and this actually makes a lot of sense, like, now, considering the idea of, like, the trad wife, how that has become such a sensation, Here we call it the cult of motherhood. Well, yeah, I mean, actually, you know what? I think it's actually called that. I think it's called the Nazi cult of motherhood. Now that I think about it, what the Nazis did. Yeah, yeah, it's the cult of motherhood, where like even their propaganda films, like if you look at them, what they were doing in like 40, well, even in the late 30s, like 38, 30, 39, prior to September 1st, of course, um, et cetera, et cetera. Like there are certain aspects of it. I'd say that's a reasonable description. Yeah, it was the cult of motherhood. But one thing about it was that, like, also how it presented, right? Like in terms of like even to themselves, right? Like even to Germans, right? Was to show something that, like, then the Americans, well, not oddly enough, but then the Americans take upon themselves, right? The, like, like the happy family, because there's a specific one I remember, because Hitler actually visits this family, right? Like it shows it in the video, in the film, um, and it's like the white picket fence, right? The night, the house with the mother and the father and the kids, right? It's like this almost prelapsarian image of like the perfect family, right? Um, and like you see that, right, being, I mean, that's the same thing you see now, right, where people who are, white supremacists, right wingers, etc., right, like they keep saying they want this past of like the 50s, but that didn't exist. That was literally, like, a lot of that was like ad campaigns, right, about you know what I mean. So I've always found that really I mean, I like they think Mad Men is like a documentary, and it's just like, no. East Germany legalized, in 57, okay, for over 21, 68 for, yeah, that makes sense. 1968, that was, quite a year for all of Europe. Equality with heteros in 89, finally in place until 1994 when the West caught up. And that's saying a lot. You know what I mean? Like when the West catches up, but it also goes to show that, like, Germans so legally Germans didn't take a step back. Oh my goodness. Lantipod, thank you so very much for the raid. I appreciate it. Welcome in, welcome in. Hello, hello, hello. Hello, Lantipod. Hello. Welcome, raiders. Welcome, streamer. I'm Shakespeare. I am a cultural historian, or Shakespeare, whichever you prefer. My focus is typically on Jewish and Latin American history, but today I'm talking about Lebanese history as well. Ah, mon ami Gableu, bonjour, comment allez-vous? Ah, c'est bon, c'est vraiment une bonne surprise. I thought it was like Shakespeare meets Robespierre. Yeah, yeah, cause like Irene, NCC began because we both speak French. She began to call me Shakespeare, so I go by Shakespeare. So thank you so much. I appreciate it. Thank you so much for the raid. I appreciate it. And yes, thank you so much. Enchanté, vraiment. C'est vraiment bonne surprise. Merci bien. But thank you, I really appreciate it. Oh yeah. Like we've known each other for years. Like sometimes, like, that's, you know what I mean. So speak American. while we literally talk about the Treaty of Versailles and the French Mandate of Lebanon.
Lebanon and Syria came under the mandate of the French. Sharif Hussein's son, Faisal, was quickly expelled from Syria, although the British would make him king of Iraq. Greater Lebanon was established, with Mount Lebanon constituting the bulk of its territory.
So here, right, like, this land here was never part of, like, any I mean, maybe if you go back to the Phoenicians, I guess, but like this was never like technically part of any other. Uh, right, it usually was considered part of Syria, right? Um, and the areas that are the most Christian are between Tripoli, which actually Tripoli has the most Eastern Orthodox Christians up here, and then here, sort of between the Beirut and Tripoli, you have the most Maronite Christians, and then everything south of Sidon down to the Israeli border is majority Shia, and up here in the north is majority Shia, which is also Alawite because there's a Alawite. In fact, the Al Assad family is actually Alawite Muslim. But here you have mostly everywhere else, sort of like here in the here runs the Lebanon mountains, right? Um, yeah. So anyway, my point being that yeah, so you have all these different groups sort of mixed here, but they had typically been considered part of Syria. Um, and so when the French initially did this, they weren't going to include all of Lebanon, or what is now Lebanon. They were only going to include the areas that were majority Christian, right? So then that way they can do essentially what the Zionists wanted to do in Israel, right? Create in the case of Israel, a Jewish majority state. In the case of Mount Lebanon, or what they would have called it, a Christian majority state. But they had to take on more land because it wasn't going to be viable as a state, because they wouldn't have had enough like farmland and stuff like that. So, oh my goodness, Adrian Vixen, thank you so much. Welcome in, welcome in. Ah, welcome in, Adrian Vixen. Welcome, streamer. Welcome, Raiders. I'm Shakespeare. I am a historian, cultural historian. My emphasis is Jewish and Latin American history. Currently, we're talking about Middle Eastern history, particularly the history of Lebanon. But welcome in, everybody. Hello, hello. Welcome in, welcome in. It's so nice to see you. Hello, Frankie Panty. Hello. Everywhere that ain't America is just not America. Yes, thank you so much. Welcome in, welcome in. Let me see. Let me see this. Let's see this clip. That is one of those fundamental oppressive aspects of capitalism that it will always rely on to try to reassure and reassert itself, right? Oh, it's so good to see you all. Please make sure, if you've been part of the 2 raids that have come in tonight, to refresh your screen. That way you can, and also mods, if you would please make sure to shout out both of our raiders. I would appreciate that. Yes.
As well as the incorporation of key cities such as Beirut, Tripoli, and Sidon. France's rationale for Greater Lebanon was for it to serve as a safe haven for Lebanese Christians.
I literally just said this. Yeah, that France's rationale for Greater Lebanon was for it to be the Christian state, right? Like, that's what it was meant to be. Hello, Princess Monaco. You know what's funny? Like, one thing about like OBS is that like I can't use all of the extensions. Oh, this one is so cute. By the way, Adrian, I meant to tell you like about I meant to tell you about this one. I love this emote, the Palestine flag one. Oh, I love it. It's perfect. It's absolutely perfect. But one of the things though is that is that for some reason, like on OBS, you can't make it so that you have access to all of the emotes you have on whatever it's called, like the other emote thing. So, oh, it's available on your merch. Oh, nice. I love it too so much. I put sunglasses. Oh, that's cute. Oh my gosh, I have to look at that. BTTV. Yeah, yeah, yeah. Thank you so much. Thank you so much. I appreciate that. Yes, BTTV. Yeah, for sure. Yeah, yeah. I Frankenfurters and the other one. The other one. But yeah, so essentially the French were like, the British, they want to create this Jewish state. Why don't we try to create a Christian state for us, you know? Well, not for us, but you know what I mean. Like, I mean, you know. Uh, and so that's what they were trying to do, right?
But the inclusion of some of the coastal cities made the demographic makeup a lot more complicated, as these cities often had
That's a weird. I don't know. Okay, look, I gotta say something. Okay, Hikmah history. Using the word complicated like that, like, uh, there's a in the stream settings panel that works for me. OBS can be a tricky mistress. Oh yeah, like I'm so averse to touching anything because as soon as like I move especially with when it comes to sound, like when people say, "Oh, there's a sound thing," I'm like, "Oh my gosh, if I have to start touching anything with the sound, it's gonna just yeah, it's very fragile, very fragile. Like it's like if you don't set it up exactly right the first time, you're just you know." But yeah, I find it really weird to say, oh, it's more complicated now that there are large Muslim populations. Yeah, because then you can't create ethno-religious state, or I mean, because we're used to thinking of ethno-state, right? But obviously, Judaism is an ethno-religious group, right? So in the same way, right, the Maronite Christians also view themselves, and I think, if we take away kind of the Western view of religio, right, how we think of religion, and see how they might see religion as being intertwined with, again, I'm not saying that but that is what they're trying to do by creating a state that is Christian and Lebanese, right? It's Frankerface. Yeah. Yeah, I don't know. I said Frankenfurters. I think it's because I'm like, yeah. IDK about fragile. Yeah, okay. Yeah, maybe not fragile, but it is complex. It is complex. And yeah, that's all. Yeah, that's a very good way of putting it.
large Muslim populations. The French mandate's favoring of the Maronites was an open secret, and a census carried out in 1932 put the Christians at a narrow 51% majority.
Oh my gosh. Okay, so this is what's remember when I said that during the partition of Palestine, right? The percentage, like majority that was in the Jewish partition part, right, was going to be 51%. Do you see how these two are very, like, there's a reason why the Phalangists, who were the Christian fascists of Lebanon, and why they are very, very much in bed with the IDF. I mean, to the point where I'm not even joking, they like opened up the border for the IDF to do their invasion in in 82. So, when Benny Morris was running around the place. Yeah, especially because like I don't have, I only have this headset, right? Like if I had to, like, I do plan on someday, right, upgrading it to having more stuff, but audio is a tricky thing in OBS, but also in general, it's harder than most people who haven't done audio. Yeah. Oh, 1000%. Like that's the reason why I tend to defer my questions to people like, well, people who know, like Zira or, you know, stuff like that. So, but yeah, um, so essentially what the French decided to do, which was a bit, although I haven't had many problems myself, I've also got pretty much the simplest setup possible. Okay. Um, that's kind of what I did for myself is I try to make it as easy as possible for myself because I know I'm not like an audio engineer and I don't know that much about it. Um, but like so again, so you have this here it's the entire country though, right? This that's sort of chopped off of Syria, and this census, I kid you not, is what in 1946, right, when France leaves, quote unquote, right? It's this the mandate, right? That's what they base their government off of, and I kid you not. So the way I was formed was that for every 5 Muslim seats, and this is how their government still works today in Lebanon, it's everything is sectarian, right? That means everything is based, and I know questions may arise of, well, what if this or that, right? The way how it works is for every 5, and I don't, this was the original setup, for every 5 Muslim seats, right, there have to be 6 Christian seats. So you see how that immediately sets up an inequality, right? That's just like always going to be perpetuated, right? Like, because it's based off of a census from 1932 where there was a slight majority of Christians, and that's being used in 46 to then determine governments going up until the 80s, until the Lebanese Civil War starts. So yeah, I know streamers who use an extra headphones to listen to audio during stream from time to time, but it requires extra headphones. And yeah, that's true. Morning, dear. Reminds you of certain inequality laws in regarding to yeah, for sure. But it's just like those really weird like this like because they wanted to create a Christian majority state, when they were able to capture, right, like in one instance in time when it was a majority, this literally, they will not let this go, right? Like the Phalangists, the Lebanese Front, like what, like all of the different names of all the different right wing, Christian right wing organizations, militias that exist now, right? This is why they still want, like, if they're willing to have any government, right, in Lebanon, they want it to be with them in the having the majority, even if that isn't the case. This is why I disagree with Hikma's placing of blame on the Palestinians, because they are living in Lebanon as refugees, right? But he essentially blames, maybe I shouldn't put it so harshly, but it's kind of hard for me not to say that, because he says, are Palestinians responsible for, XYZ thing, right? But essentially, because Palestinians move into Lebanon, right, and they don't do so because they want to. That's the important point. We're here from, oh, thank you so much, Dead and Joker. It's so nice. The late raider has arrived. Oh, it's so good to see you, Dead and Joker. Welcome in. Yeah, they're not in Lebanon by choice. They're not in Syria by choice. Like when I was in Damascus and I was visiting Palestinian refugee camps, like the elders there, right? Like, to see them say what I would do to be able to drink water from the well, right, of my village, right, because it had the sweetest water, Like that's literally just the memory that just came back right now. Like, you know what I mean? Like it's just things like that. Like, oh, what I would do to see this, to see my, my grandfather's lemon tree. Such simple things, right? And it's like, imagine if all of that were taken away from you, and this was also denied you for generations. Um, and then you had this ethno-nationalist, religio-nationalist group like the Phalangists, right? Made up of the Maronite Christians, who then are saying like, "Oh, it's your fault that we don't rule the roost in Lebanon anymore," right? Like that's essentially the beginning of the Lebanese civil war. I know I'm boiling it down to a very, viscous, reduction, but that's one of the main things that's why I disagree with his video on focusing on the Palestinians, because it's like they're not there by choice. They're, and they are not even counted in. They don't. No, they don't. That's another thing, is that's why when they commit what I would submit before you, and before the International Court of Justice, if I could, do so. We can't. But like, yeah, they were given no political power, but they're saying, oh, somehow the numbers became skewed so that Muslims became a majority instead of Christians. The 1932 census was 51%. Like, it was, like 51% is not right. And so, unlike what the Zionists did in Palestine, where they did the expulsions, the ethnic cleansing, in Lebanon, they decided to devise a system that would always keep them in power. At least so they thought, right? The Maronite Christians, and when that finally fell apart, right? That's when they began to blame a Muslim, or a majority Muslim group, because again, the Palestinians aren't all Muslim, which is another thing. There's also a lot of Christians in the Palestinian population. In fact, some of the oldest Christians in the world are the Palestinians, and so they were harmed. They were harmed, and so that's why, to me, Sabra and Shatila should be termed a genocide. In my opinion, I think, to me, it meets the same standard as Srebrenica. There is intent. There is, like, it's, anyway. I'm not gonna make my full, case here, but in my book, so to speak, that maybe one day I'll get to writing. Who knows? I would go and research much more, but I would say that it would qualify at the very least. At least that those two instances of those two refugee camps, because there's no way you can look at that and be like, oh, that was just some naughty soldiers. Like, no, that is not what that is. Yeah. Yeah, they don't. Years ago, I was on a call with two Palestinians in Gaza. My friend who translated, and an elder who said very beautiful and emotive things about their village. I mean, like, there are things that, like, my grandparents have said about where they're from, right? And it's obviously not Palestine, but it's like, because they had to leave it because of, all of the political unrest and many other things, right? Like the dictatorship in Mexico, et cetera, et cetera. Hearing them talk about it as a place like, oh, it's like, like the rest of the country is foreclosed to us in some form or way, is like, I can't even imagine, not being able to go to their former house, right? Or whatever, right? Like, it just does not, But then I remember there are instances where that is the case, right? Where I've met people who, like, literally, I mean, just like Palestinians still hold the keys there. And I remember we had an amulet of this a long time ago. You say it like that with the boiling made me think of dulce de leche. That's funny. I think I'm too hungry for properly focusing on important parts of it, so I'm gonna lurk. No worries, no worries. Now I'm thinking about dulce de leche. Anyway, I haven't made some in a while. But I do remember that we used to have an amulet for these keys, and I remember asking, like, what are these keys? And it was like the Sephardic Jews that were kicked. And it's weird too, because this morning I was reading over the Alhambra decree, right? And it's like it just amazes me how it's like so with all of the superfluous language of the Renaissance, right? Oh, to all of the barons and blah blah blah, right? um you have to announce this decree so that no one may claim ignorance, that every Jew must be blah 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 blah. And it's just like, no one should ever participate in the perpetration of such a thing, uh, such as that form of dispossession, that violent dispossession. You know what I mean? And it's just beyond me. I don't know. Like, I don't even know if I'm making my point full, but it's just like, you have the expulsion of the Jewish people from Iberia, who still to this day sing about Sefarad, right? Sefarad Doro, right? And it's like, it literally exists in our collective memory, right? As this, like, land that has been lost to all time, like this place we can never return to, right? And oh my god, it violates basic rules of being human. Exactly. So yeah, I don't know. That's so funny that I've never seen it with the with the with the sunglasses. That's so nice. Oh, I've never seen it. Oh, black and white. Oh, interesting. That reminds me, I need to get the one with the one that's my emoji, the writing down one. I need to get that.
Thus, Lebanon's political system as a multi-confessional state with a Christian ascendancy was enshrined in the National Pact of 1943, through which each of the religious groups was allocated a key position in parliament, where there would also be a ratio of 6-5 in favor of the Christians to Muslims.
Remember, this is based off the census of 1932. What they're talking about is this is 10 years later, right?
That same year, Lebanon gained its independence from
Or
France,
1946.
but the political structure the French built for the Lebanese essentially guaranteed them to ever-present conflict, since it was all dependent on demographics, which are constantly changing.
Oh no, is he gonna go into this? No. Oh, it works. It works. Person turquoise writing. Yeah. Headphones. Yeah, it's literally me. Like when I am doing research, or when I'm like, like at the library or whatever, I'm literally like headphones on, and I have like a notebook in front of me, because I always have like the book in front of. Oh my gosh. The Habsburgian emote with the sunglasses. It works really well for our Habsburg. But oh, now he's bringing up see, look. Whenever just a random person starts talking about the word demographics in general, I start getting very like, please don't tell me that they're going to start talking about what I think they're going to start talking about, because it usually ends up being they are going to talk about what I don't want them. Right? But you can already see what he's going to bring up, because one, well, you couldn't see it in the Arabic, but you can see that the kids here are all wearing kafiyas. So that says something about these children, right? And the changing demographics for the Austro-Hungarians. Yeah, the demographics, yeah. So now we're getting to the part where the Filistini are becoming, yeah.
5 years later, with the establishment of Israel and the influx of over 100,000 Palestinian refugees, many of them being Sunni Muslims, contributed to the destabilization of Lebanon's internal politics.
Bro, they weren't given citizenship. They weren't counted in the census as towards the. This is the thing, is that he takes the, like, whatever the government, which again was was made so that it was a Christian majority government, said, and what the phalangists said to be true, which is like, oh, well, the Palestinians caused the demographic shift to where then Muslims felt that they should have more. No, it's that 51%, based off of a census from 1932, is not exactly the best basis of political power. I don't know. But I don't think making it contingent on something like that is a good idea. You know? Like, I don't, just off the bat, like, it just doesn't seem like a good idea for me. But now he has done the thing I said that I didn't want to, like, say he's done without, people hearing him out. Now he said it, like, he is saying that because Palestinians are majority Sunni Muslim, they are the cause, or a cause, of the destabilization, I'm quoting now, quote unquote, the destabilization of Lebanon's internal politics. No. No. Because there were Christians too. I mean, why didn't the Christian, you know what I mean? Like, I mean, sure, people can say, well, of course there's a higher number, but they're still refugees. They're not given citizenship in Lebanon. They aren't given citizenship in Syria. They're not given citizenship in Jordan. Like, like, they're refugees. They're not counted in part of the official census. So they wouldn't give more power to any group, even the Christian ones. So
all this would spill over into the Lebanese civil war of the 1940s.
Oh my god. We went from 1948 to 1970. Like, and then stuff happened, and in 1970, no. He's doing it again. He's doing it again, bro. Hikmah, look. The Palestinians, one, they did not destabilize Lebanon. The power system in Lebanon being based on a census that gave 51% to claim, like, once you introduce a system that says, oh, well, if you have a certain a percentage majority of the population, therefore you get to have the government based on that, that's eventually going to catch up with the people that set that system up. Like, that's just kind of how things work. But again, that was always going to happen, like, so to speak, right? Like, Lebanon system seems like what you design if you want it to be unstable. Well, again, the reason why is because they wanted Lebanon to be a viable state, right? So they had to absorb areas that were majority Muslim. Had they partitioned, right? Had they only kept the parts of majority Christian, right, which would have been about 70% Christian, then they would have had essentially a state of Israel, but a Christian version, right, in the Middle East. But it would have been a smaller state. So it would have been, more surrounded by Syria, which is what they didn't want, right? Well, it's what the French and the Lebanese Christians didn't want, the Maronites. And the difference is that the comprador bourgeoisie, because of the French mandate and because of the French, humanitarian mission, as he called it, meant that the comforter bourgeoisie tended to be Maronite Christians, right? Like that's why they were able to go to other countries, right? Like immigrating out of any place, like especially across the world, is not an easy venture. It's not cheap, that's for sure. Like I know he brought up, oh, the steamship made it easy. It's easier. It's still expensive as hell, though. So, but yeah, not saying it was the intent. I don't know, but it sure seems like, again, it seems like a terrible idea if you think that if you actually think that you would give up the power that initially giving that if you think that the power you gained in the first place, right, and the basis of that power, right, being transferred to other people, right, isn't an issue, right? That was the problem, right? Is that, like, they didn't want to say it's an apartheid state, right? Because then it's a very strange thing where, like, then it would be, so even migrating as an EU citizen to another EU country is easy. Yeah, they make it seem like it's easy. Like, at least to Americans, right? It comes off as easy, right? But it's really not.
In the 70s and 80s, the tensions behind Lebanon's multi-confessional political structure still loom large over the country's fate today.
I mean, okay. Wow, that was a... Yeah, it's easier. Yeah, it's easier, but that's about it. Yeah, I don't understand though how, like, why he's showing hummus at the end, because the Palestinians didn't bring about does he, like, he says, like, the Palestinians caused this, like, that doesn't make it. Okay, I want to make sense of this. So the Palestinians, quote unquote, cause destabilization. Now it's the 70s, right? Cher is on the radio, and it's 70s and 80s. Cher is on the radio. Then Madonna comes in, right? Like a Virgin, Borderline, etc. Blah blah blah, and then Hezbollah. Like I don't know. I'm trying to make this fit. Hello, Zazir. Welcome in. So good to see you. Yeah, really. How does that work? Like, so the cause of destabilization, like, because he's not mentioning Israel. That's why. I'm like, what is he missing in terms of like his whole presentation of it. Oh yes, the state of Israel. Yeah, if you don't include the state of Israel, which he barely mentions, like, because he mentions it just to say, oh, and then the Palestinians came over. They aren't counted as citizens, so they wouldn't have contributed to the census. Definitely not enough for political stuff, and this is something you can just, again, but yeah, that part, the missing tiny piece of the puzzle. Yeah, I'm trying to think, like, what is the connection between these two things? It's the state of Israel. Like, yes. So yeah, his whole thing of, was Saddam Hussein, like, I mean, I don't know, bro. I don't know. I think that Full of Nicks was right by saying that he seems a little sus. Just a little bit. Just a little bit, though. Just a little bit. But, yeah. I don't know. What is that? Oh. Sorry, I'm like looking at this thing and I just don't Okay, I see now. Interesting. Huh. Interesting. Uh, okay. Apparently, it wasn't just that Palestinians didn't get political rights. From Wikipedia, quote, until 2005, Palestinians were permitted to work in over 70 jobs because they did not have Lebanese citizenship. So they did not get, yeah, exactly. So you even, which is funny, I mean, like, whereas, like, from my grandparents, right, like, them being Jewish, they had laws and also, stuff that was, technically not on the books or whatever, blah, 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 right? That had Jewish people where they couldn't work in a lot of different industries as well, right? Even though they were citizens of Mexico, technically should have been given all full legal rights, but they weren't, right? On the basis of just the fact that they were Jewish. So again, because they don't have the citizenship. So that claim. Thank you so much, Catpig. I appreciate that. That means that his claim that the Palestinians destabilized, and then we get the time period from 48 to the 1970s and 80s, caused the Civil War. It's just not true, because even until 2005, couldn't work in. And again, I am pretty sure the list of those jobs is very expansive, right? Because a lot of times those jobs tend to be also like jobs that otherwise would be like stuff that you could be in a union for, right? Like, refugees tend to have the most precarious options, right? Yeah, we're probably talking about entire categories of professions. Yeah, exactly. And so usually one of the things is like anything that can become unionized, anything that can become like anything where you can become a master carpenter or a master, like anything like that. Those tend to be the type of like, that's why for Jewish people, like in Mexico, for example, that you could only really own kind of like corner stores, right? Like that's essentially what you could, like that sell, like snacks and stuff like that. Like that's really all you could do, right? Because I mean, it wasn't being a peddler, right? Like back in the day, but you were still restricted into that. So check the source. It's Amnesty. Oh yeah, Amnesty. I was just reading Amnesty International's report because, like, again, I like one of the things is like as I'm writing the series of articles on my Substack, on my Patreon, the history of Zionism in Palestine, a lot of it is based, using my own research as well as the research of like other important historians of the region. I've also been reading because I then want to do a series that then talks about sort of like developments since 1967, maybe. I'm not sure. But reading the human rights reports of just Amnesty International. And funny, of all people that told me about this, it was Norman Finkelstein that told me about this report. About what's happening in the prisons, where they literally tell the prisoners, right? Like I know people have heard about Sdeteman, right? So where they're doing horrible things to Palestinians, unspeakable things. Honestly, I could not. I don't think I would want to say what goes on. But reading that report, the fact that they specifically tell them this is where they say welcome to hell, right? And it's like, there's a lot of movies where like that's kind of one of their like they're like lines, right? This is actually that. Like this, like no movie that says that and it's like whatever, this is actually that. Like every page of that, I don't even know how many pages it was. I mean, it's the full report, right? I don't read the summaries. I have to read the full reports, right? Because like when I'm citing it, I have to cite the testimonies. I have to cite the everything, right? Everything has to be cited in full. I can't do I like the summaries are only if I want to use it like in class, for example, right? But for when I'm doing research, it has to be the full report, and I have a whole bunch of human rights reports from different, B'Tselem, Amnesty International, Human Rights Watch, etc., etc. Like all of the most, senior and most respected information, right? Pardon me, all of the most senior and most respected, human rights organizations, right? I'm here reading these reports, and there was one where I read, and I kid you not, Amnesty International, yeah, well, yeah, compared to Human Rights Watch, yeah, sure. I mean, I definitely B'Tselem when it comes to talking about Palestine, for sure. But there was one part, and I can't remember exactly which page it was. It was like 20 something pages in, where I read one sentence, and I had to stop reading. That's how horrific this report is. Literally, I read one sentence, and trust me, I've read a lot of horrific stuff, right? Like, but this was one sentence, one sentence of about 11 words, and I just literally just closed it, and again, this is what I do. I mean, I'm a historian, right? It's my job to do this, right? To research this and to write about this stuff. And I'm thinking, I couldn't put that sentence in an article, even on Patreon or Substack. It literally is beyond the pale. In fact, it's beyond the pale's pale. You know what I mean? But it's the truth, and that's what's so scary, is that it's real. You know what I mean? Yeah. The difference is that it's happening right now. Exactly right. I mean, like this, like with the book here on Throne, right? It's talking about nuns navigating the Spanish Empire, but like, oh, believe you me, like the torture that some of these nuns were put under, right? Like that I could describe for you, right? I mean, I wouldn't go into detail, but I mean, there are specific, especially if they're found out to have Jewish ancestry. Oh, you don't even want to hear it. You don't even want to hear it. You do not want to hear it. But yeah. Let's see here. Human Rights Watch published a report where it claimed the Hamas. Zaka. Oh, yeah. The difference is that, yeah. Okay. And that my taxes contribute to it. Okay, I'm unemployed. Well, I mean, like, even VAT and other stuff, right? Like, all that stuff, technically speaking, goes to, you know what I mean? Like, all of the money you spend, even in other things, right? Like, it helps other people, right? Businesses pay their taxes, which also pay you know what I mean? Like, it's, yeah, it's, but yeah, that's just, but I did read another report that was talking about violence on the border, and it, because that's something that, again, it's also very important to me personally, as well as Palestine is, and I was reading it, and it was literally saying, like, if you would just, the U.S.-Mexico border, it was literally saying that like 99.9% of the violence that happens on the U.S.-Mexico border would not take place if the border were not so militarized, forcing people into such horrific conditions in order to cross and blah blah blah. Because and I'm like, I only wish that all of the people that they're interviewing here, I sincerely wish that, like, that that any harm that has ever that they may find solace and heal from it and get, because so much, like, just like all of the detail was so. They were like brainstorming with Zaka what was in the minds of Hamas. Oh, I can't believe anybody would ever take Zaka seriously. Now, there were some people that said, "Oh, well, when they initially wrote the report about using Zaka as a source, that was before the documentary that outed them as essentially being like I don't even know like what to even say it is, because it's like, because saying propaganda, like a propaganda organ of the state of Israel is like too, is almost letting them get away with too much. Like, they did more than that, right? Because they're the ones that did the 40 babies and the all that stuff, right? That just was used to justify. And now, like, that's completely, I mean, same thing like with that 3D rendition of the supposed like command center underneath Al Shifa Hospital. Like, how come they don't show that? How come they never showed that ever again? Lieutenant Admiral Hagari. Like, my goodness, these people. Just. But yeah, like, I just remember that, like, that little, like, remember how they kept playing, like, every news channel, every mainstream media news channel just like, ooh, I mean, they didn't add sound, but you know what I mean. um I wish they would have added sound. At least they would have made it a bit more, but whatever. Let's see here. Hey, Mo and Noah, do you know if is Streamlord gonna keep streaming, or is he gonna stop soon? I kind of need to know. I don't want to like, uh, you know, that's. Oh, it's, I don't mean to like, because I know it's part of a conversation, but since emotes. Okay. Um, okay, everyone. Thank you so much for joining me tonight. Again, because I really wanted to get back to streaming and wanted to do something. And thank you for joining me for this discussion about Lebanon in particular, right? Yeah, thank you all. But I really gotta go to bed. So everybody, we're gonna go Ray Galactic Streamlord. Make sure to tell them hello. Tell them that Shakespeare says hi. And yes, thank you everybody. Thank you everybody who came out. Thank you. I appreciate each and every one of you. Thank you. Thank you. You all help make the stream. Thank you.